Paul McCartney decided not to tell his wife Linda that her cancer progressed and had become terminal. He didn't think it would do her any good if she knew, so she continued riding her horse until the day before she died. These were just some of the wedding rings that were taken from victims of Buchenwald concentration camp during the Holocaust. It's estimated that around 100,000 Japanese people vanish without a trace every year. Many of these cases are people simply trying to save their honor after a divorce, job loss, or a failed exam. After the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, aka Black Dahlia, reporters told her mother that Elizabeth had just taken first place in a beauty contest. Once they had enough information from her for their story, they informed Mrs. Short that her daughter had actually been viciously murdered. Frank Lentini was a circus performer in the early 1900s who was born with a parasitic twin. This resulted in him having 3 legs, 4 feet, 16 toes, and yes, 2 sets of functioning genitals. He married, had 4 kids, and lived to the age of 78. Here's a clip of Admiral Jeremiah Denton blinking the word torture in Morse code while he was held captive in the Vietnam War. He was being filmed for Vietnamese propaganda, but U.S. naval intelligence was able to decipher his message. In 1979, gold miners in Alaska stumbled upon this perfectly preserved steppe bison that's right around 50,000 years old. It was so incredibly intact that researchers decided to take a chunk of muscle from its neck and cook it into a meal. It was described as tough like beef jerky, but quite delicious aside from the muddy aftertaste. Former WWE wrestler Chris Benoit is considered to be one of the most talented professional wrestlers of all time. But sadly, his career was tainted when the 40-year-old murdered his wife and son before taking his own life in 2007. After multiple tests were conducted, it was revealed that his brain was so damaged from wrestling that he had the brain of an 85-year-old with an advanced form of dementia, likely contributing to his horrific behavior. In 2012, a UK surgeon was fired and convicted of assault after branding his initials into the livers of 2 of his patients. It was only discovered when another surgeon had to perform a corrective surgery on one of the patients. In 2013, Florida man Jeff Bush was sleeping in his bedroom when a sinkhole opened up beneath him and swallowed him whole. His brother heard his screams from across the house and immediately ran over to start digging, but Jeff's body was never recovered. In 2018, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin called 911 to report that she and her 12 siblings were being abused by their parents. This is sadly rather common, but what police discovered in the Turpin household was far more horrific than anything they'd seen before. The entire house reeked of human excrement, decaying garbage, and dead pets that were scattered throughout the home. Many of the 12 children had been tied to their beds and were covered in bruises and dirt. It was clear that David and Louise Turpin had been torturing their children for years, allowing them to eat just once per day and shower just once per year. They would reportedly often leave food on the table and force their children to stare at it before throwing it away in the trash. This resulted in extreme malnourishment as their oldest son was 29 years old but weighed just 82 pounds at the time of their rescue. The kids were so clearly abused that a few doctors broke down in tears upon seeing them for the first time. The Turpin parents were handed 12 counts of torture among numerous other charges and were effectively sentenced to life in prisons. While filming for Rocky IV, Sylvester Stallone challenged Dolph Lundgren to try to knock him out for real. Lundgren hit him so hard that he was sent to the ICU for 9 days and was lucky to survive. The Cordoba fighting dog was a dog breed that became so aggressive that it was very difficult to breed them, since a pair would often fight to the death rather than mate. This eventually contributed to their extinction before the 20th century. This photo from 1960 shows segregationists harassing 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, the first black child to attend an all-white school. They portrayed her as a doll laying in a coffin to protest her attendance at the school. Chester the Molester was a comic strip by Dwayne Tinsley that featured a pedophile named Chester who was interested in molesting young girls. After producing the comic strip for 13 years, Tinsley was convicted of molesting his teenage daughter Allison over a 5-year span. This devastating photo was taken in India during the Madras famine of 1877. The man is fighting the urge to sleep so that he could protect his family against cannibals. People were so desperate for food that your own neighbor could snatch up your child to eat them at any given time. In 2010, Dave Grohl was admitted to the hospital due to an overdose. He apparently consumed too much caffeine from coffee and thought he was about to die after experiencing severe chest pains. Also in 2010, a homeless man named Hugo saved a woman from a knife attack in New York City. He was stabbed while trying to help but continued chasing the attacker before collapsing to his wounds. Security cams captured more than 20 people walking past and staring at him, but no one offered to help. He was found dead on the sidewalk more than an hour after the attack. This photo shows the Undertaker looking down at medical staff after chokeslamming Mick Foley through the roof of Hell in a Cell. The fall was completely unplanned and left Foley with multiple dislocations, bruised ribs, and internal bleeding. The Undertaker was certain he'd just killed the man, but Foley got up and even finished the match. The band Fleetwood Mac highly considered thanking their drug dealer in the credits of their most popular album, Rumors. They only decided against it after their dealer was murdered. In 2010, a commercial plane crash in Africa killed everyone on board except for one passenger, who was left with an insane story to tell his rescuers. Apparently, a man smuggled a crocodile on board, which managed to escape shortly before landing. This made everyone panic and run to one side of the plane at one time, causing it to flip and eventually crash. If your skin ever starts turning yellow like the photo on the left, you should see a doctor as soon as possible. This man had a condition called jaundice, which can indicate serious problems with the liver. These photos were taken before and after the man received a liver transplant. Before the murder of Shinzo Abe, the most recent political assassination in Japan happened in 1960. Leader of the Socialist Party, Inajiro Asanuma, was attacked by a 17-year-old wielding a sword. The brutal murder was captured live on television and broadcasted to millions across Japan. A group of researchers in Africa once hid a speaker near a herd of elephants and played a recording of one of their herd members who had died. The dead elephant's family suddenly went wild calling for him, and his daughter cried out for days afterward. The researchers later vowed to never conduct such an inhumane experiment again. In 2010, Ozzy Osbourne had his genome sequenced to understand how it was possible for him to still be alive after abusing his body for so many years. Researchers found mutations related to addiction, metabolism, and Ozzy's Neanderthal ancestors. In fact, he carries several 100,000 genetic variants that have never been seen before by scientists. Meaning if he wasn't a literal mutant, he likely would have died decades ago. There have been at least 9 different studies on the DARE program, and all of them agree that it either does nothing or only worsens the problem. Gary Webb was an investigative journalist who was one of the first to report on the CIA's involvement in the cocaine trade. A few years later, in 2004, Gary was found dead in his home with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. His death was officially ruled a suicide. Ever since they were little kids, twins June and Jennifer Gibbons refused to speak to anyone other than each other. By the time they turned 18, they'd committed multiple criminal offenses and were sent to a high-security mental hospital in 1981. Years prior, they made a long-standing agreement that if one of them ever died, the other must begin to speak and attempt to live a normal life. While at the mental hospital, they decided it was now necessary for one of them to die, and Jennifer agreed to make the sacrifice. In March of 1993, Jennifer was rushed to the hospital where she died of a sudden inflammation of the heart. There was no evidence of drugs or poisoning in her system. It was as if she'd just died out of nowhere. Afterwards, June said she was finally liberated from her sister and was eventually released from the asylum. She now talks to people and has lived a relatively normal life ever since. In 2013, 16-year-old Ethan Couch killed 4 people while drunk driving, but he initially wasn't sentenced to any jail time since his attorney argued that he suffered from affluenza, a mental illness caused by growing up with too much money. In ancient Sparta, only 2 groups of people could have their names inscribed on their tombstones: men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. In 1994, Los Angeles police arrested a man dressed as the Grim Reaper carrying a scythe. He was reported by various nursing homes after staring through patients' windows while wearing the costume. In the year 2000, the charred remains of Mary Lou Morris were found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Only 4 days later, the body of Mary McGinnis Morris was found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Police believe that a hitman killed the wrong Mary Morris and tried to fix it. In 2001, Ashton Kutcher had a girlfriend who was murdered by a serial killer after being stabbed 35 times in her own home. Kutcher would end up testifying in the trial of the Hollywood Ripper, who would later confess to murdering at least 10 women over a 15-year span. Author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, lost her virginity on top of her mother's grave. She also kept her dead husband's heart and carried it around for 30 years until her own death. According to the FBI, if you're murdered in the United States, there's only about a 40% chance that your killer will be found and punished. In 2009, a Russian man went to the doctor suspecting that there was something wrong with his lungs. Initially, doctors thought they were dealing with a tumor, but it ended up being something they'd never seen before. It turned out that years ago, the man accidentally inhaled the seed of a fir tree and it started growing inside of him. This was the last photo taken of Marie Joseph before she drowned in the swimming pool shown. Due to the cloudy water, her body wasn't found for 2 days, during which time people continued swimming in the pool, unaware that Marie's body was decomposing beneath them. In 2011, scientists conducted an experiment to find out what's inside the average human belly button. One individual who hadn't bathed in years hosted 2 species of bacteria that are typically only found in ice caps and thermal vents. In the year 2000, an orca whale killed a great white shark off the coast of California. According to satellite tags, the smell of the dead shark's carcass apparently caused all nearby great whites to suddenly vanish. One shark that was in the region immediately dove down 500 meters and swam straight to Hawaii without stopping. In 1997, episode 38 of the Pokemon anime aired just one time before being pulled from TV forever. The episode featured a flashing strobe effect that sent nearly 700 children to the hospital due to dizziness, nausea, and seizures. The incident nearly single-handedly ruined the franchise, and the Pokemon Porygon was banned from ever appearing in an episode again. P.T. Barnum began his career as a showman after purchasing a blind slave woman named Joyce Heth. Barnum claimed she was over 160 years old and had been the nanny of George Washington. He exhibited her until her death in 1836 and even charged people 50 cents to watch her autopsy. Syrian archaeologist Khaled al-Assad dedicated his life to the excavation of the ancient city of Palmyra. In 2015, he was tortured and later beheaded by ISIS after refusing to give up the location of precious artifacts. Queen Elizabeth had 2 first cousins named Nerissa and Catherine Lyon who were severely disabled. Nerissa was publicly pronounced dead in 1940, while her sister Catherine was said to have died in 1961. But it was later revealed that they were actually tucked away in a mental asylum without any visits from the royal family until their actual deaths in 1986 and 2014. The US military buys a prank fart spray called liquid ass to train and prepare medics for the stench of the battlefield. This is a 1969 photo of Roman Polanski kneeling next to the door where the word pig is written in his wife Sharon Tate's blood. While Polanski was working on a film in Europe, Tate was stabbed 16 times by members of the Manson family when she was 8.5 months pregnant. Polanski has said that the murders changed him forever and that not being there is his greatest life regret. On 9/11, hospitals throughout New York City were bracing for maximum capacity, only to slowly realize that there were very few survivors of the collapse. Of the 3,000 people who were buried, only about 20 were pulled from the rubble. Since 1982, a team of researchers have been going deeper and deeper into the Veryovkina Cave, the deepest cave in the world. At 1,100 meters deep in 2021, they found the body of a climber dangling from a rope. A suicidal man spent months building a secret room in his home containing a homemade guillotine. He then lay down inside the guillotine, took sleeping pills, and set a timer for the blade to drop. His decapitated body was discovered by his father, who was completely unaware of his son's gruesome plan. When Mary Ann Bevan was 32 years old, she was a beautiful nurse who was happily married with 4 children. But all of that changed in 1906 when she began suffering from acromegaly, a disease that doctors couldn't quite understand at the time. Mary was experiencing migraines and joint pain that turned into abnormal facial growth and distortion. Within 5 years, she looked like a completely different person and saw her beauty continue to fade with each day. Due to her ugliness, she was eventually fired from her job, and in 1914, her husband Thomas died from a stroke, leaving Anne and the 4 children behind. Desperate to feed her kids, Anne decided to enter a contest and won the offensive title of Ugliest Woman in the World. She was offered a job at Dreamland Circus in Coney Island, where she endured daily ridicule for 13 years until her death in 1933. An 18-year-old girl from Alaska was encouraged to murder her best friend by a boy she met online who claimed to be a multimillionaire. She then convinced 4 others to help her so that they could split a $9 million prize. It ended up being a total scam perpetrated by a mentally disabled man from Indiana. The assassin bug wears the corpses of its prey like a backpack. After stabbing its prey and slurping out the innards, the insect uses the corpses as armor and camouflage. In 1991, Patricia Stallings was sentenced to life in prison for poisoning her child with antifreeze. She then gave birth to a second child while in prison, who was given to a foster care. but he eventually became sick with the same symptoms as the first child, indicating a rare metabolic disorder, not poisoning. This proved her innocence and she was released. In 2018, Sarah and Jennifer Hart drove a van carrying their 6 adopted children off a cliff. It was officially ruled a murder-suicide since the racist couple were abusive to their children for years. They only decided to end it all when they felt authorities closing in on their crimes. North Korean founder Kim Il-sung had a baseball-sized tumor on the back of his head that propaganda officials worked hard to hide. As a result, this is one of the only photos ever taken of the tumor. This disturbing drawing was created by a nonverbal dementia patient in a nursing home. A hitchhiking robot that relied on the kindness of strangers to travel the world made it safely across Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands. But just 2 weeks into its American tour, Hitchbot was found in Philadelphia with its arms and head ripped off. This is the last known photo of Freddie Mercury before his death in 1991. In order to avoid the attention, Freddie denied rumors about having AIDS until the day before he died. During the Middle Ages, it was believed that sperm produced from the left testicle resulted in having a girl. So to ensure having a son, men would often have their left testicle removed in a painful surgery. In the 1960s, Canadian woodsman Francis Wharton shot a deer and made dentures out of its teeth. He then proceeded to eat the deer with the deer's own teeth. A cat named Oscar correctly predicted the deaths of over 50 patients at a nursing home in Rhode Island. Soon after he arrived at the home, staff noticed that Oscar chose to nap next to patients who would die a few hours later. Nurses would sometimes even place Oscar next to patients they thought would die, but he would move to other patients and be correct every time. In 1997, Bill Cosby's son Ennis was killed in a failed robbery attempt while he was changing a tire. Cosby was working toward his doctorate in special education and planned on building a school for children with disabilities. In 1971, a thief broke into a home and was shot in the legs by a trap set by the homeowner. The thief then sued the homeowner for damages and won. In 1999, a 26-year-old Polish man murdered his father with a screwdriver before making a mask out of his face. He then put on the mask along with his father's clothes and had his grandfather over for breakfast. Due to his poor hearing and eyesight, the old man swore he was talking to his son the entire time. The crime was only discovered when the grandfather found his son's body and called police. The killer was deemed clinically insane after claiming that the murder was an artistic work. In 1987, Kenneth Parks drove 12 miles to his mother-in-law's house and stabbed her to death in the middle of the night. But he didn't receive any jail time because Parks' lawyer was able to prove that he was sleepwalking the entire time. The bolt at the top of a helicopter shaft that holds it all together is called the Jesus nut. It got its name because if it fails in flight, the only thing left to do is to pray to Jesus. Viking warriors who were badly wounded were given onion soup to test whether or not they would survive. Someone would smell the wounds after a few minutes, and if onions were detected, it meant that death was imminent. Pedro Lopez is a Colombian serial killer who was sentenced in 1980 after murdering more than 300 young girls. But after serving 18 years in Ecuadorian prison, he was released on good behavior in 1998, and his current whereabouts are unknown. Brooke Greenberg was an American woman with an unknown condition called Syndrome X that prevented her from aging. She was 20 years old at the time of her death, but never developed physically or mentally past the age of 1. To make a sword from the blood of your enemies, you would have to kill over 300 people to get enough iron. The U.S. military sends many of its doctors to Chicago to give them practice on gunshot wounds. During World War II, the Soviets tried to train dogs to run under enemy tanks with bombs strapped to their backs. However, this plan fortunately ended up backfiring for the Soviets. Because the dogs had been trained using Soviet tanks, many dogs ended up running to them during actual combat, blowing up friendly tanks instead. In 1912, President Teddy Roosevelt was shot in the chest just before giving a speech. Upon noticing the bullet missed his lungs, he carried on despite the blood seeping from his shirt. He delivered the full 90-minute speech before accepting medical attention. The first bomb dropped by the Allies during World War II killed the only elephant in the Berlin Zoo. Alfonso Flores from Texas received a major cosmetic surgery to increase his height from 5'11" to 6'1". He claimed it allowed him to finally achieve his dream of becoming tall. In 2009, Larry Maria Moncada from Iowa disappeared after working his shift at the supermarket. He was missing for more than a decade until his body was found when the supermarket was renovated. The man had fallen into a small gap between the wall and cooler, likely dying from dehydration after a few days of being stuck. After a failed circumcision led to a sex reassignment surgery, David Reimer was raised as a girl. Once he found out that he was in fact not a girl, Reimer started living as a male at the age of 15. But after years of suffering from severe depression and confusion, Reimer took his own life at the age of 38. Many shelters won't allow black cats to be adopted around Halloween time, out of fear that they might be tortured or sacrificed. In many cities across the US, people on the sex offender registry have to keep their outdoor lights off during Halloween. This is a 1948 photo of a Chicago mother hiding her face in shame after putting her children up for sale. 2 of them were sold to an abusive family for $2 apiece so that their mother could afford rent. Their new father would often tie them up in a barn and force them to work long hours, often referring to them as slaves. On Halloween in 1974, Ronald O'Brien laced his 8-year-old son's pixie sticks with cyanide so that he could claim the boy's life insurance. He also gave the candy to 4 other kids to set up the story that a local madman had poisoned them. Once police received word of the first boy's death, 3 of the 4 remaining candies were recovered quickly, but 1 was still out there. When the parents of this final child were informed by police, they became hysterical when they couldn't find the pixie stick in their son's bag. So they rushed upstairs to find the boy in his bed with the poisoned candy in his hand. He had thankfully been unable to open the wrapper because of the staple that was used to reseal it. So Timothy O'Brien ended up being the only confirmed case of a kid dying from poisoned Halloween candy, and it was done by his own father. Pamela Anderson contracted hepatitis C in the 90s after sharing a tattoo needle with her husband Tommy Lee, who never told her he had the deadly virus. Doctors warned her it could kill her within 10 years, and the virus slowly attacked her liver, while she suffered from chronic fatigue, weakness, and bouts of depression. At her lowest, she described feeling like her body was rotting from the inside, as the disease forced her out of the spotlight and into isolation. For over a decade, she lived with the fear of cancer or liver failure, until she was finally cured in 2015 by a breakthrough antiviral treatment. In 2004, 7-year-old Tyler Moon became a walking miracle after a horrific quad crash left both he and his father critically injured in the Australian bush. Despite suffering 2 collapsed lungs filling with blood, 7 broken ribs, and a shattered arm, the boy staggered for nearly a kilometer through dense forest to reach help. When he finally reached his mother's house, he managed to say, "Dad said you should call an ambulance," before collapsing on the ground. Doctors said it was a miracle that Tyler survived at all, let alone saved someone else's life in the process. Tom Cruise once sued a gay adult star for $10 million after the man claimed they had an affair. The actor Chad Slater eventually admitted he made the whole thing up and defaulted on the lawsuit, owing Cruise millions he'd never pay. Cruise has also sued multiple publications over similar claims about his sexuality, aggressively shutting down rumors for decades. In 2009, a California woman sued the makers of Captain Crunch, claiming she'd been misled into believing that Crunch berries were real fruit. After eating the cereal for 4 years, she discovered they were just brightly colored cornballs and accused the company of false advertising. The court quickly dismissed the case, ruling that no reasonable consumer would think Crunch berries were real, especially since no such fruit exists. In 1981, a 9-year-old girl's family sued Disneyland after claiming that Winnie the Pooh punched her in the face so hard that it caused brain damage. The case took a bizarre turn when the actor in the costume appeared in court fully suited up and demonstrated that due to the restrictive arms of the outfit, hitting anyone was physically impossible. A man who was struck and killed by a metro train in Illinois had his dismembered body parts fly off and injure a nearby woman. She later sued his estate, arguing that by being stupid enough to get hit by a train, he was responsible for the injuries she sustained from his flying limbs. Young actor Cameron Boyce tragically died in his sleep on July 6, 2019 at just 20 years old from a seizure caused by epilepsy, a condition he'd been managing with treatment. His death was officially ruled as SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, a little-known fatal complication that occurs without warning, most commonly during sleep. Cameron had reportedly experienced only about 5 seizures throughout his life, all while sleeping, and his family had never even heard of SUDEP until after his sudden death. He was found unresponsive in his North Hollywood home, and there was nothing that paramedics could do once they arrived. Cameron had spent much of his young life fighting for others, raising millions to bring clean water to Africa, supporting homeless shelters, and using his platform to speak out against gun violence. In the wake of the tragedy, his family founded the Cameron Boyce Foundation to raise awareness about epilepsy and SUDEP, hoping to prevent others from suffering the same fate. In 2022, Twitch streamer and former adult star Adriana Chechik broke her back after jumping into a deceptively shallow foam pit at TwitchCon. The pit was barely padded over concrete and she fractured her spine in multiple places. While hospitalized, she discovered that she was pregnant, but the emergency surgery forced her to terminate the pregnancy. Metal rods were implanted as she had to relearn how to walk and was left with lasting nerve damage. The incident sparked outrage as others were also injured, but no real accountability followed. Chechik later said the experience destroyed a part of her life that she'll never get back. In 1996, Polish model and former Miss International Agnieszka Kotlarska narrowly escaped death when she canceled her seat at the last minute on TWA Flight 800, the doomed flight that exploded mid-air, killing all 230 people on board. But just weeks later, fate caught up with her. As she arrived home, a stalker she once knew attacked without warning, stabbing her to death in front of her husband and young daughter. To prove that mosquitoes transmitted yellow fever, American physician Jesse William Lazier deliberately allowed himself to be bitten by an infected mosquito. 17 days later, Lazier died from the very disease he was trying to study. His death confirmed the deadly role of mosquitoes in spreading yellow fever, sacrificing his life to save millions of others. In honor of the 80th anniversary, these are the most morbid facts about the bombing of Hiroshima. Many people who witnessed the nuclear blast firsthand were blinded instantly. Some were even left with permanent atomic bomb cataracts like this one. When the bomb was dropped, the blast was so powerful that it permanently burned the shadows of objects and people into the ground. A few of these shadows remain imprinted in the Peace of Memorial Museum. The massive destruction of Hiroshima was caused by only a half a gram of matter being converted into energy, about the weight of a butterfly. Some Hiroshima survivors eventually grew black fingernails that looked like this. These fingernails contained active blood vessels and bled profusively when they broke off. If you're a certain distance from a nuclear explosion, you won't die immediately. Instead, you'll get third-degree burns all over your body, and your nerves will be killed so fast that you'll barely even feel it. This happened to a lot of victims in Hiroshima, and when rescuers would grab their arms to help them, their skin would slide off like a glove. The Japanese army had no idea Hiroshima had been bombed until an entire day after it happened. This was because there was no way to communicate with them, since the bomb destroyed all phone lines, telegraph lines, and radio transmitters. They had to literally fly an official out to Hiroshima to find out why they weren't communicating, and he found a city that was completely obliterated. Albert Einstein encouraged President Roosevelt to develop the atomic bomb because he feared the Nazis would make one first. But he deeply regretted this after hearing about the devastation of Hiroshima, and knowing that his discoveries led to the invention of the atomic bomb made him very depressed. Here's a watch found in the Hiroshima rubble that's permanently stopped at 8:15 a.m., the exact time of the bomb's detonation. Godzilla was created as a metaphor for nuclear weapons and was given the appearance of a Hiroshima victim. His atomic breath is meant to symbolize the blasts and devastation of the bombs, and he's covered in keloid scars to depict the brutal body scars of Hiroshima survivors. In fact, those who suffered the most from the bombings were in such horrific condition that people called them ant-walking alligators. According to one account, they were described to be, quote, faceless with their heads transformed into blackened alligator hides with red holes indicating mouths. They had once been human. When the sky exploded, they'd had the misfortune to survive. The alligator people did not scream. Their mouths couldn't form the sounds. The noise they made was worse than screaming. They uttered a continuous murmur like locusts on a midsummer night. One man, staggering on the charred stumps of legs, was carrying a dead baby upside down. None of them survived for long.